What if I told you that the United States Treasury might effectively be forced to buy 1 million Bitcoin?
Forced. That's a strong word.
I know, but I don't mean forced by a new law passed by politicians or, forced by some lobbying group in D.C. I mean forced by math.
Okay, now you have my attention. Forced by math.
Yeah. What if the twin crises of, one, this completely unsustainable national debt, and two, an escalating AI arms race have created a scenario where buying Bitcoin, it's not a speculative gamble anymore. It becomes a geopolitical mandate.
A literal sovereign necessity.
Exactly. That's the term.
It sounds like the plot of a techno-thriller, doesn't it? But when you actually sit down and you look at the ledgers, when you look at the raw data coming out of the Congressional Budget Office, and then you overlay the strategic requirements for this new phase of artificial intelligence,
You start to see it.
you start to see this unprecedented convergence, as the research puts it, these two massive forces colliding.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. We're looking at a federal debt load that has now breached $37 trillion. It pushes the absolute boundaries of fiscal stability.
Yeah.
And right on top of that, crashing into it, is this global race for what the Pentagon is calling AI war supremacy.
A race that demands over $20 trillion in funding.
And that $20 trillion isn't for, better chatbots or generating funny images of cats.
No, let's be very clear. We're talking about orbital data centers. We're talking about space-based compute infrastructure.
It's a science fiction reality that is happening right now, and it is incredibly expensive. So the thesis we're exploring today is, well, it's simple, but it's also terrifying. Traditional financial solutions, the old way of doing things, printing money, issuing bonds, they are failing to meet these needs.
The math just doesn't work anymore. The system is exhausted.
Which brings us to the solution that everyone from, frankly, Wall Street to Washington is suddenly whispering about.
Leveraging Bitcoin as a strategic national asset.
And we're going to get deep into why gold, their traditional safety net, the asset of last resort from millennia, is technically insufficient for this specific moment in history.
It's a great asset, but it has problems in this context. Serious problems.
We'll look at how Bitcoin's unique properties, specifically its absolute scarcity and its digital nature, might offer the only viable path to stabilizing the dollar while simultaneously funding the race to dominate AI.
It's a massive claim, I know. It sounds like hyperbole.
But
once we lay out the numbers step by step, it becomes harder and harder to look away. The logic is, well, it's compelling.
Just might. Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Satoshi.
And I'm Satoshi.
All right, before we dive into the deep end, I do have a quick request for everyone listening. First of all, thank you. Thank you so much for the amazing response to the show. We've been blown away.
We really have.
We know many of you have strong feelings about synthetic voices versus human hosts, but the objective of this whole project has always been to see if there's an audience for really deep, rigorous, almost academic-level research.
And your support is living proof that popular media desperately needs content beyond pure clickbait.
It really does.
It's not just about how it's spoken. It's about whether the research is coherent, meaningful, and, timely. Is it relevant to your life?
Exactly. Now, we might sound like a broken record here, but currently only about 2% of our listeners actually subscribe to the show.
2%. It's tiny.
And we really need to hit that 1,000 subscriber milestone to keep this project alive. It's a benchmark that tells us, and the platforms, that this is worth continuing. So please, if you're getting any value from this, just take a second and hit that subscribe or follow button wherever you reach us.
YouTube Music, Apple, Spotify, or Fountain.fm if you're into the value for value model.
And if you listen on another platform, just drop us a note at the email in the description so we can count you towards our goal. It really, really helps.
And as always, just a reminder that we are a research-first show. We're not just riffing here.
Whoa.
We publish the full paper or essay first, which you can always find linked in the description, and then we get to the audio part.
Unlike most podcasts where hosts just, show up and decide what to talk about in the first 5 minutes, we really don't want to waste a single second of your time.
So please do check out the source material, the charts, the data. It's all there.
Even saying all that feels like taking 30 seconds of your precious time. So with that, let's get right into it.
Let's do it.
The exhaustion of the U.S. fiscal model. We mentioned the headline number, $37 trillion in total national debt.
It's a staggering number, but it's important to break it down a little. The publicly held marketable debt So the stuff that investors, both domestic and foreign, actually buy and trade is around 29 trillion of that.
Still a huge number.
A world historically huge number. But the figure that really keeps Treasury officials and, frankly, central bankers up at night isn't the total principal, it's the interest burden.
The cost of just servicing that debt. The payments you have to make just to stand still.
Correct. Net interest payments are now $1.1 trillion annually.
$1 trillion.
Just on interest. And to give you some context for that number, that 1.1 trillion exceeds the entire federal budget for Medicaid.
Wow.
It's now rivaling what we spend on Social Security. Think about that. We are spending more money on the interest from our past mistakes than we are on the current health of our most vulnerable citizens.
That's a truly sobering statistic.
Yeah.
And this leads directly to what the research we're drawing from calls the nothingness problem.
The nothingness problem. I love that term because it's so descriptive. It's the logical endpoint, the exhaustion of the fiat debt model.
What does it mean exactly?
It means the world is slowly but surely realizing that these treasury bonds, these IOUs from the U.S. government, are essentially promises based on, well, on nothingness.
There's no hard asset backing them.
None. There is only the full faith and credit of the government, which is really just a euphemism for the promise of future taxation from citizens who are also in debt. And when you print more dollars to pay the interest, you devalue all the existing dollars.
And so we're seeing a demand collapse.
A slow motion demand collapse. Look at the data. We have the charts in our source material. Who is buying the debt? Or maybe the better question is, who isn't buying it anymore?
China.
China is the poster child. Historically, a massive buyer of U.S. debt. It was a core part of their economic strategy. Today, they hold less than 5% of outstanding U.S. debt.
And what was that figure at its peak?
It was well over 10% just a decade ago. They are actively, methodically divesting. They are fleeing. They see the writing on the wall.
And it's not just China, is it?
No, not at all. That's the key. Emerging economies everywhere, the BRICS nations and beyond, are now viewing U.S. treasuries as liabilities, not assets.
Why liability?
Because of the debasement risk. If you are, say, Brazil, and you hold your national savings in U.S. dollars, and the Fed is printing trillions, your savings are melting, the value is disappearing, so holding treasuries is a guaranteed loss of purchasing power.
So they're looking for an escape hatch.
They're looking for an escape hatch. They're buying gold hand over fist. They're making bilateral trade deals in their own currencies. They are de-dollarizing.
So what you're left with is a U.S. balance sheet with a massive growing liability, the $37 trillion in debt, but no corresponding asset that appreciates to counterbalance it.
That's the crux of it. The asset side of the ledger is empty. It's just promises.
Which brings us to the stark conclusion of this section. The U.S. needs an asset. It needs something on its balance sheet that goes up in value independently of the debt cycle.
Exactly. You can't fix a debt problem with more debt instruments. That's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. You need an equity-like asset, something that sits on the positive side of the balance sheet and grows on its own, untethered from your liabilities.
Okay, so we have this massive hole in the bucket called the national debt, a hole that's getting bigger every second. Now let's pour in the second crisis.
The accelerator.
Section 3, the AI arms race. And we need to be really clear. We are not just talking about software companies battling for market share here.
No, we are talking about a quiet World War III. And I don't use that term lightly. This isn't hyperbole.
What does that mean in practical terms?
It means the winner of this race controls algorithmic intelligence. And if you have superior AI, you win conflicts before they even start. You can model every scenario. You can run war games 1,000,000 times a second. You outmaneuver, you outproduce, you outthink, and you outsecure your adversary at every level. It's the ultimate strategic high ground.
And the sources we've looked at estimate the cost of achieving this total war supremacy in AI to exceed $20 trillion over the next decade.
20 trillion. It's a number that dwarfs the Apollo program, the Manhattan Project, everything that's come before combined.
It's hard to even visualize.
It is. And it's because the infrastructure demand is physical. This is the part people miss. It's not just code floater in the cloud. It's atoms. It's energy grids, custom silicon foundries, and massive, massive data centers.
Look at the CapEx numbers from the big tech companies.
They're eye-watering. Their research points to Google. Their capital expenditure projection for 2026 alone is between $175 and $185 billion.
For one company.
For one company in 1 year. And that's just for their commercial needs. That's not even the military-industrial side of things.
But this is where the story gets really, really wild. where it truly enters sci-fi territory. The research highlights a space-based pivot.
Yes. This is absolutely crucial to understanding the scale of the problem. We just saw the effective merger between SpaceX and Elon Musk's other company, xAI, valued at a colossal $1.25 trillion.
Which is not just a corporate merger, is it?
It's the blueprint for the future of national defense. Their stated plan is to launch a constellation of 1 million satellites.
1 million.
And these satellites aren't just for internet service, they're designed to act as interconnected orbital data centers.
Okay, so you have to ask the question, why? Why put data centers in space? Is it just because it sounds cool and futuristic?
It does sound cool, but no. It's about solving two fundamental problems of physics that are throttling AI development on Earth: heat and energy.
Explain that.
AI chips, GPUs, they generate immense heat. On Earth, cooling these massive data centers consumes astronomical amounts of fresh water and energy. It's a huge environmental and logistical bottleneck.
Yeah.
In space, what do you have? You have the vacuum. It's a perfect natural radiative cooling system. The heat just dissipates. And for energy, you have the sun. Constant, unfiltered solar energy, 247.
So it solves the two biggest physical constraints on scaling AI.
It completely removes them from the equation.
So if you have a network of 1 million data centers orbiting the planet, that sounds like an insurmountable tactical advantage.
It's the ultimate high ground. A distributed orbital network provides a deterrent that is arguably more potent than nuclear arsenals. You can project intelligence, surveillance, and cyber capability anywhere on the globe instantly, and it's almost impossible to attack.
But here's the problem, the $20 trillion problem.
Here it is. Private markets cannot fund this. They simply do not have the capacity.
And we have a real-world example of this, right? The research mentions Oracle.
We do. Oracle, a massive established tech company, went to the bond market to sell $25 billion in debt for their AI expansion, a huge sum, but in the grand scheme of this $20 trillion race, it's just a drop in the bucket.
Then what happened?
And they struggled. The market balked. Initially, their bonds were treated almost like junk bonds.
Why?
Because the market is saying, you guys are leveraging yourselves to the moon to chase this dream. The risk is too high, the timeline is too long, they can't underwrite it.
Literally and figuratively to the moon, in this case.
Literally.
Yep.
So if a corporate giant like Oracle is struggling to raise a few tens of billions, how on earth do you raise 20 trillion?
The private sector can't do it.
So the sovereign balance sheet must. The government has to step in. But, as we established in Section 2, the U.S. government is broke.
So let me get this straight. We have a broke government that desperately needs to fund the most expensive and critical technological rollout in human history just to survive a geopolitical standoff with its rivals.
That is the corner we are painted into. A fiscal crisis on one side, a national security imperative on the other, a rock in a hard place.
Which naturally leads people to ask the next question. Well, what about gold? Section 4. Why can't the U.S. just buy a ton of gold or revalue the gold it already has to solve this problem?
This is the geopolitical trap. And it's a brilliant, subtle point in the analysis. Gold is a fantastic asset. It's trusted. It's been money for 5,000 years. It's history. But for this specific problem, it has a maturity problem.
What does that mean, a maturity problem? Is it too big?
In a word, yes. The total market cap of all the gold in the world is around $29 trillion. It's huge. It's a heavy, liquid, globally distributed market.
So it's hard to move the price.
Extremely hard.
Yeah.
To move the needle on the U.S. debt, to make the price of gold go up enough to make a real dent in a $37 trillion liability, you would need to pump trillions of dollars of new capital into the gold market.
Okay, let's say the U.S. decides to do that. They start buying gold with everything they've got. The price goes up.
Yeah.
Why is that a bad thing for the U.S.?
Because of who else owns it. This is the rivalry problem. The global distribution of gold creates a massive strategic disadvantage for America in this scenario.
Okay, let's see the numbers.
The U.S. government officially holds about 8,133 tons of gold. A lot, but not compared to the global total. Now look at China. Their private holdings alone are estimated at over 31,000 tons.
Wow. 4 times as much, just in private hands.
4 times as much. And that doesn't even count what the People's Bank of China holds and doesn't report. Now look at India. The households and temples there are estimated to hold around 34,600 tons.
So if the U.S. government starts an aggressive campaign of buying gold, trying to jack up the price to save its own balance sheet.
You are effectively writing a massive check to the citizens and governments of China and India. You are creating a monumental wealth transfer from the U.S. Treasury directly to your biggest geopolitical and economic rivals,
You'd be funding their AI and military buildup.
with your own desperate attempt to fix your balance sheet. It's strategic suicide. You pump their economies full of trillions of dollars in wealth, which they can then use to fund their own satellite constellations and AI research.
That is the trap. You can't use the weapon that your enemy has already stockpiled.
Perfectly said. You need an asymmetric asset. Something they don't have, something you can corner, or at least gain a strategic advantage in.
Enter Bitcoin. Section 5. The Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, or SBR.
This is where Bitcoin's perceived weaknesses become its greatest strengths in this context. It's the price-sensitive lever.
What does that mean?
Its market cap is much smaller than gold's. We said it's around 1.4 trillion today, and most importantly, its supply is absolutely, verifiably, mathematically fixed at 21 million coins. No more can ever be created.
So it reacts very differently to large inflows of money.
Exponentially differently. It's a much smaller door. If a buyer the size of the United States sovereign treasury decides to acquire 1 million Bitcoin, which is just under 5% of the total supply, it would trigger a massive global repricing event, a supply shock.
The price wouldn't just tick up.
No, it would re-rate completely. The market would front-run the government's entire multi-year buying program instantly. Every major corporation, every sovereign wealth fund, every nation-state would realize the game has changed and pile in.
And this creates what the research calls a multiplier effect on the balance sheet.
Right. Unlike gold, where you are pushing a giant boulder up a very gentle hill, with Bitcoin, a relatively small U.S. investment creates massive unrealized gains on the government's balance sheet.
Let's do the math on that. Run a hypothetical.
Okay. Let's say the U.S. buys 1 million Bitcoin at today's prices, an average price of, say, $70,000. That's a $70 billion investment. A lot of money, but rounding error compared to the national debt.
Okay.
But that very act of buying and the signal it sends could easily push the price of Bitcoin to $1 million per coin over the next decade as the world remonetizes to this new reality.
So that $70 billion investment is now worth
$1 trillion. If it goes to $10 million per coin, which many in the space believe is possible in a world where it's a primary reserve asset.
That's $10 trillion.
$10 trillion sitting as an asset on the U.S. balance sheet. You can use that value to collateralize the debt. You can actually start to pay down the $37 trillion using the appreciation of this new asset. It's the only asset in the world with the mathematical potential to grow fast enough to outpace the debt.
But people are terrified of the volatility. They see it crash 20%, 30%, and they panic. How does a government deal with that?
We have to completely reframe how we think about volatility. For a day trader, for someone with a mortgage payment next week, that volatility is a heart attack.
Of course.
For a sovereign nation with a 20-year, 50-year, 100-year time horizon, that short-term volatility is just noise. It's completely irrelevant. You have to look at the long-term trend. The 4-year rolling return for Bitcoin averages 400%. The 10-year return is 33,000%.
When you look at it that way.
When you look at it that way, the risk of Bitcoin's short-term volatility is actually much, much lower than the certainty risk of a treasury bond collapse.
Explain that. Certainty risk.
The path of a treasury bond held to maturity in a highly inflationary environment is certain. It is a certain loss of purchasing power. The path of Bitcoin is volatile, but it has trended up and to the right for 15 years. One is a bumpy ride up. The other is a smooth ride off a cliff. Which risk do you want to take?
That's a powerful framing. So, okay, let's say the decision is made. How do you actually do this? Section 6, execution. You can't just print more dollars to buy Bitcoin because that would just add to the inflation problem and defeat the whole purpose, right?
Correct. That would be counterproductive. You need a budget-neutral mechanism. And this is where the proposed Bitcoin Act of 2024-2025 comes in. It's a clever piece of legislative thinking.
And it revolves around this idea of gold certificate revaluation. This sounds like some kind of complex accounting magic.
It sort of is, but it's perfectly legal and has historical precedent. Right now, on its books, the U.S. Treasury holds gold certificates. These are basically paper claims representing the physical gold held in Fort Knox and elsewhere.
Okay.
But They are valued on the books at the 1973 statutory price of $42.22 per ounce.
$42. But you just said gold is trading at nearly $5,000 an ounce.
Exactly. The books are lying about the true value of the asset. The Bitcoin Act simply proposes that the Treasury revalue those certificates to the current market price of gold, mark-to-market accounting.
And what happens when you do that?
When you update that single entry in the ledger, you instantly generate a massive accounting surplus, a one-time windfall of approximately $642 billion.
So you create money out of thin air.
Yeah.
But it's based on the unrealized value of an asset you already own.
You are simply acknowledging the real value of what you already have. It's not printing. You then take that $642 billion paper profit and you use that to fund the initial purchase of the strategic Bitcoin reserve.
So you don't print new dollars. You don't raise taxes. You just swap one form of hard asset for another, more strategic one.
Precisely. It's an elegant self-funding mechanism.
And who is the person that might oversee this kind of radical shift? We keep hearing the name Kevin Warsh being floated for the next Fed chair.
Yes, Kevin Warsh is seen by many as the likely Fed chair for 2026, and he is often described as a pro-Bitcoin hawk.
That sounds like a contradiction. A hawk usually means someone who likes high interest rates and tight money.
And he does. But his core philosophy is that the Fed's balance sheet is bloated with garbage debt treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. He wants to shrink the balance sheet and move from holding these debt-based assets to holding hard assets like gold and, yes, Bitcoin.
So he sees Bitcoin as a tool for Fed discipline, a watchdog.
That's exactly how he's described it. He believes Bitcoin acts as a policy watchdog that signals when the Fed is messing up. If the price of Bitcoin is screaming upwards, it's a sign that the Fed is being too loose with the money supply.
That's fascinating.
But more importantly, he's a big believer in a coming productivity cycle. He thinks AI is going to drive massive economic growth, and he sees Bitcoin as serving as the pristine collateral, the discipline mechanism for the dollar that underpins that new economy. It keeps the government honest as we go through this technological revolution.
And it seems like the banks, who were once the biggest enemies of this idea, are starting to fall in line too. Which brings us to Section 7, the banking pivot.
They have to. They have no choice. Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan, who famously used to threaten to fire any trader on his floor for even touching Bitcoin, has done a complete 180. He now says crypto is real.
Why the change of heart?
Self-preservation. Think about it. What are the biggest assets on the balance sheets of all the major banks?
U.S. Treasury bonds.
U.S. Treasury bonds? If treasuries fail, if there's a sovereign debt crisis, the entire banking system becomes insolvent overnight. They fail. So they need the strategic Bitcoin reserve to succeed. They need the government to stabilize the bond market. And this is the only plausible way to do it. Their survival is now tied to the success of this plan.
But there's a deeper tech angle here too, isn't there? It's not just about being a store of value like gold. It's also a settlement layer.
This is the 1000x better argument, and it might be the most important piece of the puzzle for the long term. Bitcoin isn't just digital gold. It is a profoundly superior technology for final settlement of value.
Let's talk about speed.
Bitcoin settles with absolute irreversible finality in minutes, usually between 10 and 60 minutes for a transaction to be confirmed on the blockchain and be completely settled, gone forever from your account to another.
And how does that compare to the legacy system?
The legacy system is SWIFT. When you send an international wire transfer, it can take anywhere from 1 to 5 business days to actually settle. And it's not even true settlement, it's a series of IOUs being passed between correspondent banks.
And in the AI economy we've been describing.
That's a lifetime. An AI agent orbiting the planet in a SpaceX satellite needs to pay a ground station in Australia for a burst of data transmission. That AI agent cannot wait 3 days for a wire transfer to clear.
It can't walk into a Bank of America branch and open an account with a driver's license.
It can't. It needs automated, trustless, permissionless, instant settlement. The entire future economy is going to be machine-to-machine transactions happening millions of times a second.
So the $20 trillion AI economy needs a native currency, a native settlement rail.
It absolutely does. And Bitcoin is that rail. It is the critical infrastructure for the automated economy. It's the plumbing of the future. The dollar and stablecoins will be the currency, but Bitcoin will be the final settlement layer, the base money that secures the whole system.
So let's try to wrap this all up. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground.
We certainly have.
The summary, as I see it, is this. The United States is geopolitically and mathematically cornered. It's pinned down by its own debt, and the existential need to win the race for AI supremacy.
A very tight corner.
The old safe haven, gold, is too heavy, too mature, and its ownership structure makes it a strategic trap. Buying it would enrich our primary rivals,
The non-starter.
which leaves Bitcoin as the sovereign necessity, the only asset in the world that is fast enough and digital enough for the AI economy, and scarce enough and price-sensitive enough to fix the federal balance sheet.
That is the picture the research paints. It's a bold thesis, but the logic holds together.
Okay, so I want to leave our listener with a final provocative thought to chew on. We've talked a lot today about the risks of doing this, of buying 1 million Bitcoin. But what is the consequence of inaction?
That is the real question, isn't it?
What happens if the United States government fumbles the ball? If it hesitates, if it gets bogged down in politics and misses this opportunity?
What if a rival nation, say China, or perhaps a coalition of the BRICS nations working together, capitalizes on this sovereign squeeze first? What if they are the ones who announce a strategic Bitcoin reserve?
What would that mean?
It would mean they effectively capture the future of value and intelligence in one move. They would corner the world's premier digital reserve asset while we are still sitting here arguing about interest rates on debt that can never, ever be repaid.
So the risk isn't buying Bitcoin.
The risk isn't buying Bitcoin. The risk is watching someone else buy it all.
A chilling thought to end on. Thank you for listening to The Deep Dive,
Stay curious.
and we'll see you next time. I'm Satosha.
And I'm Satoshi.